In the headlines, President Park Geun-hye makes clear that she is not stepping in to resolve the political deadlock over the April ferry disaster. An in-depth look at the two Koreas' joint business complex, marking the first anniversary of its resumption after Pyongyang's unilateral shutdown last year. And a U.S. airstrike hits an Islamic State target near Baghdad, a first in its expanded efforts. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the newscast. Live from Seoul, I am Kang Chery. President Park Geun-hye spoke up again this Tuesday on the parliamentary logjam created by the so-called ferry bill, and she made clear that she cannot get involved, while the National Assembly Speaker stepped in with hopes of untangling the situation. Choi You-sun has our top story.
President Park Geun-hye was very clear in her first response to calls from the opposition party that she step in to resolve the current legislative deadlock over a probe into April's ferry sinking.
지금 진상조사위원회에 수사권과 기소권을 주자는 주장에 대해 일부에서는 대통령이 결단을 하라고 합니다. 하지만 그것은 삼권 분립과 사법 체계의 근간을 흔드는 일로 대통령으로서 할 수 없고.
Political discord over the issue has suspended parliamentary affairs for months, with the victims' families demanding that the committee stated in the bill have more power in the investigation. The president instead said the second bipartisan deal on the bill, which the opposition backtracked from last month, should be accepted. She also urged the National Assembly to quickly get past the ferry bill standoff and focus on improving people's livelihoods and national safety management. President Park relayed her position to the ruling party leadership at her office later in the day. With neither the ruling nor the opposition side willing to budge more than 2 weeks into the Assembly's regular session, Speaker Chung Lee-hwa took matters into his own hands.
The speakers decided on the Assembly's regular session schedule as the ongoing parliamentary paralysis with a lineup of pending bills has run counter to the people's wishes.
The standing committees, with or without the opposition, are expected to resume on Wednesday, with the ruling party aiming to pass other economic and reform-related bills at a plenary session on September 26th. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
North Korea has lodged a complaint about anti-Pyongyang propaganda leaflets from South Korea, that is, with a letter to South Korea's presidential office. A South Korean government official says it came from North Korea's National Defense Commission as a follow-up to one sent last week. Both letters said Seoul needed to put a stop to these leaflets if it wants to hold another round of high-level talks. South Korea's stance is that the Seoul government has no rights to stop private groups from flying those leaflets. No announcement out of Washington regarding a potential delay in the transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul. But the word is we might find out from the two countries' security meeting next month. Kwon Soo-ah tells us more.
The timing and conditions for the transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul are still under discussion, despite expectations of an extension from next year's deadline to around 2020. High-level defense talks between National Security Advisor Kim Kwan-jin and his U.S. counterpart Susan Rice are ongoing in Washington, and both sides have agreed not to specify a set date for the transfer yet, deciding that it's best to continue monitoring the situation. South Korea's defense ministry said Tuesday that the two allies are aiming to announce an agreement at the annual South Korea-U.S. Security Consultative Meeting in October. It's the same message that emerged after talks last month between Deputy Defense Minister Ryu Jae-seung and U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia David Helvey. Both are said to have assessed the South Korean military's response capability against North Korea's nuclear threat, which is the very reason the OPCON transfer had earlier been delayed to 2015, following Pyongyang's third nuclear test in February last year. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Exactly 1 year ago today, operations at the joint inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex were restarted after a 5-month suspension initiated by Pyongyang. The resumption was only possible after the two Koreas agreed on a set of measures to prevent another unilateral closure. But have they been effective? Our Hwang Sung-hee tells us more.
It's 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and these cars are making their daily commute to North Korea. They're South Korean workers who work at the Kaesong Industrial Complex.
It wasn't until a year ago that the South Korean workers were allowed to cross this border again. That's after North Korea unilaterally shut down the complex for 6 months amid heightening inter-Korean tensions.
Reopening Kaesong for business, the two Koreas agreed on a set of measures to better manage the complex, like easing regulations for South Korean commuters, allowing the use of internet and mobile phones, and attracting foreign investors. A year has passed with very little progress.
The security checks on vehicles is even tighter than before. They even check underneath the car seats.
If mobile phones were allowed, the internet will be available. That would be very convenient.
The 125 South Korean businesses in Kaesong are still struggling, with their total production volume at just 80% of what it was before the shutdown. Park Geun-hye, who runs a textiles factory, is among them.
We lost trust from our clients, which caused considerable damage. It will take a long time to recover. We had to compensate the clients on last year's losses.
Some blame Seoul's heavy economic sanctions against the North.
Because new investments in the complex are blocked in principle, the companies have trouble expanding their business.
Experts say current inter-Korean tensions rule out the possibility of any significant improvement.
Once North Korea's nuclear program and distrust with South Korea are eliminated, the Kaesong Industrial Complex will undergo considerable growth and become a key model of economic cooperation in the process of reunification.
And people like Mr. Park are waiting to see the two Koreas work together.
Since South and North Korea have established the Kaesong Industrial Complex, we hope it will be able to participate in global business as soon as possible.
Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News, Paju.
International awareness of Japan's wartime sexual slavery is growing, with Beijing joining in on the global campaign. China is now the second country outside Korea to unveil a statue honoring survivors of Japan's sexual enslavement. Kim Min-ji has the details.
An elderly woman is reminded of her past sufferings as she stares at a monument of a girl who's shown cowering while covering her face. China has unveiled its own statue dedicated to the women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during wartime. It's the first such statue in China in honor of the victims, known euphemistically as comfort women. The monument follows in the footsteps of similar ones in Korea and the United States. Currently, there are 2 statues in the U.S., one in the California city of Glendale and another in the Detroit suburb of Southfield. Both are replicas of the peace monument that Korean civic leaders set up in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul nearly 3 years ago. The organizers of China's statue did not mention where it will be located, but the unveiling coincides with the release of The Eyes of Dawn, a Chinese movie that is based on the victims' stories and the pain and suffering they were forced to endure at the hands of the Japanese military. Around 2,000 women, mostly Koreans, were forced into sexual servitude by Japanese soldiers during World War II.
The movie reenacts scenes from history and carries the message to never forget.
The movie, which hits the screens in China later this week, is expected to shed light once again on Japan's wartime atrocities and the Japanese government's failure to fully make amends. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world,
Join Kang Chery for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8, every weeknight on Arirang TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade.
It's been 2 months in office for Korea's finance minister Choi You-sun, and markets, for the most part, seem to be getting a boost from his expansionary policy drives. But there are some questions on the fundamental side of the Korean economy. Incheon has the details.
It's been 2 months since the appointment of Choi You-sun as finance minister, and his expansionary policies to spur growth are starting to produce results in some areas. For one, the country's benchmark KOSPI reached an almost 3-year high at the end of July. The stagnant real estate market is also showing signs of improvement, and the number of housing transactions jumped more than 5% in July from the previous month. However, some argue the economy has some way to go before it's back on path to a firm recovery. July's coincidence and leading composite index, which indicates the health of the economy, was just over 100 and 101 respectively, unchanged from the previous month. A reading over 100 means that there are more optimists than pessimists on the economy. A reading under 100 indicates the opposite. The nation's job market hasn't really picked up either. In August, 594,000 jobs were created from a month earlier, but the majority of these jobs were part-time positions, and they're mostly filled by people in their 50s. On top of this, the real GDP growth rate grew a mere 0.5% on quarter, the lowest in 21 months. As a result, economic institutes, including the state-run Korea Development Institute, are reportedly considering lowering their growth projections for this year. 10 international banks have already cut their growth forecast for the Korean economy by 0.1 percentage point on average to 3.7%. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
There is mounting criticism in Korea that the government is bombarding low-income people with cigarette and local tax hikes. And a recent report shows Korea may be pretty soft on higher income earners compared to other countries. According to an OECD report, Korea's income tax to GDP ratio stood at 4% in 2012. That's the third lowest level among the 28 OECD member states surveyed. Countries with the highest income tax ratios were Denmark and Iceland, where the figures stood at 24% and 14% respectively. Korea's corporate tax to GDP ratio, however, was the fourth highest among OECD member states. With the Incheon Asian Games set to open on Friday, 60 members of South Korea's delegation arrived at the athletes' village in host city on Tuesday. Delegation Chief Park Geun-hye reiterated South Korea's lofty goals at the Games, which are to win at least 90 gold medals and to finish second in the medal standings. The delegation's remaining 1,008 members will be on hand for the official flag-raising ceremony on Thursday. Historically, the Korean Silk Road acted as a major cultural trade route that linked the country with the West during the Shilla dynasty. And today, some 150 local university students and academics began their own journey along the famed road to trail the path of their ancestors. Our Kim Young-gil has more.
The Korean Silk Road was at the center of cultural interaction linking traders, merchants, pilgrims, and monks from Korea to the Mediterranean Sea during the Shilla Kingdom, when the capital was located in Gyeongsangbuk-do province.
Last year, Gyeongsangbuk-do Province initiated the Korean Silk Road project as part of an effort to revive the historical route to boost trade and to expand cultural exchanges like the Korean Wave.
A ceremony was held Tuesday in the southeastern port city of Pohang, signaling the start of the 45-day Korean Silk Road trip. The students' journey using the sea route will take them to a total of 9 countries, including China, Malaysia, India, before their final destination of Iran. Along the way, students will visit historical sites and hold cultural exchanges. At their first destination in Guangzhou, China, students will attend a symposium on promoting cultural ties between Korea and China. Students will donate the model of a Shilla crown to a Chinese museum as a symbol of their friendly ties.
In India, we will explore the footpaths of Korean Buddhist monk Incheon, the first Korean monk who traveled to India. We will install a monument to commemorate him in the Sarnath grasslands.
The trip will help students better understand how the Shilla kingdom was able to flourish culturally and economically using the Korean Silk Road to blend foreign influences with Korean traditions and ideas. It's also intended to revive such a spirit in this generation, so they can better utilize the Silk Road routes to help boost Korea's competitiveness on the global stage. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News, Pohang.
The United States has carried out its first airstrikes on Islamic State militants near the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, and it first expanded that is military operation in this region. And for more, Paul E. is joining us from the News Center. Paul, U.S. warplanes have been bombing IS targets since last month, but experts are saying this latest offensive could mark a major turning point.
Absolutely. The attacks near Baghdad and in the northern part of the country have expanded the scope of the UN mission there, which was laid out by President Obama last week. This as top officials from Western Arab powers wrapped up talks in Paris to help Iraq defeat the extremist group. Our Sim Samin has this report.
The U.S. has expanded its aerial bombing campaign to target IS militants near Baghdad. It was the 162nd round of airstrikes by the U.S. in Iraq since early August, but the first since Washington's move to form a global coalition against IS and the first in direct support of Iraqi forces fighting the militants. This comes against a backdrop of some 30 Western and Arab countries vowing to provide military support to Iraq at the Paris summit earlier this week. France, host of the summit, has already begun surveillance flights over Iraq in preparation for further military action. Iraq's Kurds, who have scored some significant victories over IS in recent weeks, welcome the global effort to quash the extremist.
This summit in Paris is a historic summit, especially for the Kurdish people and the government. It is a very important step to destroy IS with help from friendly countries such as the great powers France, the US, and Britain.
However, the summit's joint communique made no mention of Syria, the other country IS controls large parts of. While the U.S. warned Syrian President Bashar al-Assad not to interfere with potential U.S. airstrikes inside its country, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, on Monday expressed his discontent with the U.S.-led coalition.
In the last few days, we've had some excitement, and with that excitement, we've been hearing from American officials making comments on forming a state, which are blank, hollow, and self-serving, and lack in any direction.
Although Iran says it supports the Syrian and Iraqi government's fight against the militants, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said last week that it would be inappropriate for Tehran to join the global coalition because Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Obama administration is also ramping up its response to the Ebola crisis in West Africa as the U.S. Prepares to redouble its efforts to contain the spread of this virus. What kind of support measures are we expecting down the line?
Well, according to the White House, the main surge of aid will come from thousands of military troops and much-needed medical supplies. The U.S. has also called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to tackle the epidemic that has so far killed 2,400 people. Our Song Ji-sun has more.
Washington is beefing up its support of international efforts to get the West Africa Ebola outbreak under control. The White House said Monday that President Barack Obama will travel to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on Tuesday to meet with health officials about the epidemic, and afterward announced an expansion in the number of military and medical resources to combat its spread. The measures are expected to include up to an additional 3,000 U.S. military personnel being dispatched to West Africa, along with the launch of a major healthcare training and hygiene program. The U.S. will also set up a command post in the Liberian capital of Monrovia
and help build up to 17 Ebola treatment centers in the region, with a total of about 1,700 beds. As chair of the UN Security Council this month, the U.S. called for an emergency meeting this Thursday, asking member countries to come with concrete commitments to tackle the outbreak. This is only the second time in history the Council has met to address a public health crisis. The first was in 2000 when they convened over the AIDS pandemic. The World Health Organization earlier issued a warning about the Ebola outbreak, saying that the number of afflicted patients was increasing exponentially and that all the new treatment facilities have been overwhelmed. 송지선, Arirang News.
And turning now to Mexico, Paul, where a massive hurricane has left a trail of destruction along the northwest coast, injuring at least 135 people so far. This is said to be one of the worst storms to hit this region. Give us the damage report.
Well, emergency services say thousands of foreign tourists remain stranded in the heavily flooded resort towns of Los Cabos, as most major airports have been shut down in the wake of this disaster. Hurricane Odile made landfall in the Baja California Peninsula Sunday evening with fierce winds of up to 200 kilometers per hour. Trees were uprooted, power lines downed, and hundreds of homes destroyed. Authorities say at least 30,000 people were likely in the region when the storm hit.
We have significant damage to homes. We have significant damage to businesses. The majority of light posts have fallen, trees have fallen. Vehicles have been damaged and infrastructure has been damaged. But the National Committee for Civil Protection still does not have a preliminary report at the moment about any victim from the hurricane.
Although Odile has been downgraded from a Category 4 to a Category 1 hurricane since Sunday, the U.S. National Hurricane Center says it will likely cause life-threatening flash floods and mudslides over the next 2 days.
And finally, switching gears to the tech news, Apple has released its latest sales figures for its latest new smartphones, iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, and it looks like Apple has yet again smashed industry sales records.
That's right. Online pre-orders for the new iPhones hit a new high, logging a record of 4 million units in just the first 24 hours, which is double the number for the iPhone 5 2 years ago. Apple says deliveries will begin on Friday and continue through the month of October as demand quickly outstrips supply for both the larger screen devices. With such a strong response in just the first 10 countries, analysts say Apple has another game-changing product on its hands.
Look, we think Apple's done a pretty good job of kind of getting these phones ready for release and ramping up the production. It's really just the sheer size of the rollout and how to be able to kind of orchestrate all the components, all the raw materials, all the production, all the shipping. It's just very, very challenging, and it's not surprising that we're seeing, 4 to 6 weeks of delays at least in some cases.
Sales of the two iPhone models are expected to top 9 million in the first weekend. In comparison, the latest flagship phone from Samsung Electronics, the Galaxy S5, took 25 days to sell 10 million units across 125 countries. Chery?
All right, thank you very much, Paul, for those stories, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. Typical early autumn conditions continue to stick around under moderate temperatures and breezy winds. And on Wednesday, autumn showers could drop about 5 to 20 millimeters over Jeju as well as areas along the southern coast. Overall, expect cloudy skies nationwide. Also, that big gap in temperatures between day and night will remain, with most regions beginning the day in the mid-20s, mid-teens that is, before rising to the mid-20s in the afternoon. Here are the numbers for Wednesday. Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju make it to 24, Busan to 25. As for other places, Jeju peaks at 26, Dokdo and Kumgang at 22, 23, and 22. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more updates after 10. See you then.
Thank you very much, Po Kyung, and that will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching.